Good morning, everyone, on a lovely sunny day. I'm sure when lockdown is finally over, it will be pouring with rain and grey and miserable. Usually seems to happen when we get let out on school holidays and things. So enjoy the sunshine while we've got it. Quick recap for anybody who hasn't sat on the seminars. These are the clinics that we've done in the past. Please feel free to help yourself and read those when you get them through on email, or they are on on YouTube as well. So you'll be sent that link. Have a look at those. We won't be going through anything that we've covered already, but if you do need any advice or support on any of the clinics that we've already covered, please do not hesitate to email us on info@rightdirections or give us a ring. We are in the offices from 8:30 till about 4 every day, so please do not hesitate to ring us if you've got any questions or queries. We've got some new logos for anybody who's been watching avidly. They'll notice we've changed them. Our 4 S's, we're keeping it simple: spacing, sanitising, signage and smiling. And today we're talking about risk assessments and work instructions, which obviously will cover all 4 of those in one guise or another. Today we are focusing on risk assessments, procedures and work instructions, something that Right Directions has been doing for 16 years now, writing these for organisations around the country and internationally as well. So today what we're going to focus on is ensuring that risk assessments are conducted and then work instructions and procedures are developed on the back of those risk assessments to help control the spread of COVID-19, and obviously to make sure that our customers and staff feel confident and safe when they're coming into our buildings. We're going to cover utilising information through clinics, for example, in the risk assessments. We are also going to talk, and you'll probably hear it several times throughout this clinic, on not reinventing the wheel. We at no point suggest that you go through every single one of your risk assessments to make sure they're COVID compliant. Only the key risk assessments will need to be reviewed. We are suggesting also for organisations that have to publish their risk assessments, that the risk assessments that are published are the ones that are relevant to COVID, i.e. access and activities, etc. But we will come on to that later. Ian will touch on that later. Your current processes are already probably well documented and in place, so please don't spend hours and hours reviewing old documentation, your existing risk assessments and procedures. Make sure we're going to then talk about making sure we're consulting with staff and considering their suggestions, and maybe consulting with other organisations as well. Keep yourself up to date with government, NGBs, awarding bodies and industry guidance to make sure that the risk assessments that you are writing for COVID and the work instructions and procedures stay live and stay accurate. Obviously, in the last 6 weeks, we've seen significant changes in guidance and what's happening. So there is a good chance that your information that you are writing will need to be updated. And as I've said already, please come and talk to us. I'm going to hand you over to Ian to talk through the slides.
Hello everybody. As Jill said, it's our bread and butter and the thing probably we like to drone on about most. But hopefully we want to keep this simple. We're not here to teach you how to suck eggs, but hopefully to put into context what you need to do to get this right, to try to minimise the risk of the spread of COVID and obviously any outbreaks within your own place of work that could be linked back to you. As I've reiterated already, it is under RIDDLE reportable. There are certain things you have to do, and therefore it's important that you get this right. And as Caroline said, get it right with the most efficient use of time and resource. And the other thing we want to do is try and keep this real. We recognise you're all under financial pressures, and it's vital that you remain sustainable and that this does not end up in too much financial burden on you in terms of the adaptations and the need to make sure that the focuses are in the right place. So if we start here, that all employees carry out a COVID risk assessment. That is essential. Employers have a legal duty to do that, to protect workers and others from risks to their health and safety. A risk assessment is not about creating huge amounts of paperwork, as Caroline said, but it's about identifying sensible measures to control that risk. And under the Management of Health and Safety at Work regulations, you have, as a minimum, to identify what could cause those risks or hazards. In this case, the spread of a biological agent, i.e. the virus. Decide how likely it is that those in your employ and others that might be affected by your actions could be harmed by it, and how seriously, i.e. the risk. And then take action to eliminate. Well, I don't think until they get a vaccine we're likely to eliminate it. What we're focused on is, as far as is reasonably possible, controlling that risk. Right directions at the end of the week we'll have on our Stitch platform. For those who subscribe to Stitch, we'll have 3 key documents which are templated risk assessments for you to use. They've got ideas that you might be able to use, might think are silly, but they're for you as a starting point, covering staffing, facilities and activities. If we could move to the next slide, please. Okay, so with any risk assessment, what do you need to consider and include? They're all, hopefully, for those of you who have been on our clinics, you'll have picked up various suggestions and ideas and the areas that you need to look around, where the various control measures will be needed for fitness classes. For instance, a yoga or Pilates class might need far less worry or concern about socially distancing between the class members, keeping the 2 minimum. But where you've got a high intensity class, you may wish to feel you need further distance, and particularly distance for your instructors or other control measures for your instructors. Sadly, we are at a point where we've got various bits of conflicting guidance from NGBs and other industry bodies, and it's up to you to try and assess, along with your staff, what are the most effective procedures or processes that you need to put in place to minimise the risk to those coming into classes and your instructors. And clearly the same is going to be for trampolining, swimming, etc. But the key message remains the same: social distancing, cleaning and signage. It's just the extent of that you're going to need to think through. Make sure you refer to that guidance I referred to. It's sad some of it isn't in unison, but where you do decide on a control measure that's come from one of those, try and make sure you identified where you've got that guidance from, so you're not left floundering around saying we've used this and we used a bit of that. So try and be clear. Ensure that you put a proportionate risk assessment in place where you're putting proportionate risks and severity. I think in the last clinic we did, I showed a slide which showed when you broke it down and removed those over 65 and you removed those who have got underlying health conditions, the risk to anybody within your workforce who is healthy and below 65 is remarkably very low. The press, social media, public anxiety, individual anxiety, which is real, maybe isn't in proportion with where the real risk is. So you need to make sure when you're doing these, you're proportionate in making sure you assess the risk assessments, because my fear is that lots of people will do it, which will end up with you coming to the conclusion that you can't operate. This is about getting us all operating. Lots of other industries are operating and operating successfully and have done all the way through this. And I will avoid saying my typical comment about some of those are. So you need to think also about the impact of your risk assessments where you've got others in place. So if you're introducing new chemicals into the workplace or new cleaning products, you need to make sure those other risk assessments are updated to include the COVID-19 control measures. I've already talked about, to some extent, the type of people who are going to be affected. That's certainly one of the critical points you're going to need to do, is identify from within your own workforce who is vulnerable, who has got additional issues that need to be concerned in terms of severity and likelihood, and try as far as is possible to put the reasonable steps in place to protect those individuals. You also need to consider other risk assessments. Fire risk assessments possibly won't need very much, but if people are suggesting opening doors, etc., you need to make sure your existing controls remain in place. Legionella risk assessments: if your buildings have been shut and you haven't had people going in flushing through, you might well wish to review that. And certainly if you've had Legionella test taken shortly before opening and it comes back that you've got issues, then clearly you'll need to review those risk assessments. I've already mentioned CAPCOSH. You might need to look at your current stress and mental health risk assessments, and clearly your first aid risk assessments in line with the clear guidance that is coming out in those areas will need to be reviewed. One thing about trying to make things simple, try to reduce the cost burden on you. Lots of people we've been talking to have been asking how they can keep fire doors open, and there are controls you can put in place. You can either go for linking it to your fire alarm system, which is a magnet, which is probably the most desirable, but probably is about £700 or £800 a door, to a door guard, which is sound operated, which is probably the next level down, which is probably about £150 a door, or something we saw that was very simple. Won't enable all your members and users to use it, but a simple little addition at the bottom of a door to enable someone to tuck a foot under it and pull it open will reduce probably 90% of people needing to use the door handles. And you can see in the picture in the corner there, that's it. And probably they're about a tenner a door. So there are all sorts of things you can do, from the £700 a door to a tenner a door, to reduce the need for people to touch things. And I think this is all about contact points, all about sanitisation, and the more simple things you can do that are effective, the easier it's going to be for you, and in the long run help minimise the burden on you financially and help you remain sustainable. Okay.
And I also think, Ian, just to add in there, gain customer perception and customer confidence.
Yeah.
If it looks like you're doing things, it really does help.
And this one you can't see in the pictures, but it's got a little arrow pointing down saying that there's something at the bottom that you can use your foot on to open the door. So it's simple, it's not expensive, it shows that you've thought about it. I yesterday had my first day out to go and look at a site to do a pre-opening review of its facilities, and it was just amazing how many doors had to be opened with a hand, how many handrails that we found ourselves touching going upstairs. And that type of walk around will show you for your own needs where you need the control measures to be put in place, where the sanitisation units need to go, where you need signage to remind people about adhering to good hygiene practices to help you, to help them, and to help the country minimise this R rate and keep people safe. Next slide, please. It's critical with any risk assessment, as I said at the beginning, we're not here to teach you to suck eggs, but above all else, to get the collaboration with relevant staff is going to help you, once those control measures are developed, actually be implemented. Without the ownership of the staff involved, you're going to find it very difficult to make sure any new controls, any new systems that you put in place are going to be owned and adhered to by your workforce. There is also a legal responsibility to consult and collaborate with staff, and this never more so. And I suggest the more you can do now to get your staff involved in that, and that is acceptable during furlough, so long as you're not income generating, to involve them in what you might need to be doing and consult with them should be a top priority. Once you've done them, you should perhaps think about sharing those results. You have to with your staff, but certainly with other users of the building, landlords, clients, etc. You need to get all stakeholders in this involved in the process and get them on board with you. It's not a statutory duty, but it's certainly a strongly recommended duty under the HSE that all these COVID risk assessments, don't put all your other risk assessments on there, all these COVID related risk assessments where you've got over 50 workers within your organisation as a whole, they should be displayed on your website. Clearly we think it's a good practical thing to do anyway, regardless of how many your staff you've got, because you're showing the confidence that you've set up systems and procedures that you believe are safe. So publishing on there is certainly highly recommended. We know the Health and Safety Executive will be visiting sites. They've just been given £14 million additional funding to increase their capabilities of getting out onto site. We also know the reason, or believe the reason why they've asked for the risk assessments to be published on the website is for them to be able to look at what you've got in place before they visit and assess whether they need to visit. So if you've got good risk assessments and you're one of the so far over 4,500 complaints that the HSE have received from either staff or customers about certain workplaces, they might be able to dismiss a complaint without even coming out to you by seeing what robust procedures you've got in place. So we can't over-egg the need to make sure you get these risk assessments right, keep them simple, keep them effective, and keep them practical. And unfortunately, with this situation, the guidance, the level of the R rate, the advice we're getting seems to be changing on a daily basis. So what we're saying now might well have changed by 6 weeks' time. So it's imperative above all else that you keep yourself updated and you keep your risk assessments moving with that to meet the ongoing challenge. Okay, next slide, please. So once you've got your risk assessments done, you need to turn this into a more practical application. Work instructions we've taken to be the things that you do probably at site level. There'll be things where the jobs that people do have had to be adjusted to make sure that you maintain the social distancing and cleaning practices where they are the effective control measures. So where you're adjusting emission policies, control measures, etc., where you're adjusting maybe the frequency and the way you should clean certain bits of equipment to try to make sure that cleaning standards are increased and meet the challenge that we face, then that's where specific risk assessments around COVID perhaps are written. So ensure you use government advice, keep it simple, use photos to support it where possible. But also you just need to make sure that the control measures that you've got aren't going to conflict with any that you currently have in place or leaves gaping holes. Make sure above all else they're used with staff when you bring them back in and train them in the new procedures that you have. Don't just assume because you've done the risk assessments, you've told them that they are going to fully get this and comprehend. It's going to need an ongoing process of training, management and leadership to make sure that the procedures that you put in place work on day one and will still be working in day 100 or for however long this challenge faces us. And please remember from the briefing yesterday, it's likely that we could get areas going back into local lockdowns. So we're going to need to keep on top of this to try and minimise the impact on our own businesses, our own areas. Somebody's still got a mic on. It's probably affecting other people. And to make sure you do a review and update of the results of the risk assessments. So you'll learn things as you go along. If they aren't effective or you need to do them, please make sure you're updating and reviewing them. Okay, next slide, please. At an organisational level, you possibly will need to look at your procedures. Again, this isn't about rewriting all your procedures. Perhaps it's an addendum or perhaps it's a COVID specific procedure that talks about the higher level approach towards managing pandemic, local lockdowns, and also how you're requiring your organisation as a whole to produce its risk assessments and ongoing work instructions. Again, refer to NGB and industry advice. Procedures that you might be affected might be a high level normal operating procedures, certainly for pools and trampolines. Pools and trampolines, emergency action plans might need to be affected regarding certainly first aid, but in terms of fire, life-saving priorities override social distancing during the evacuation process. There may be changes to fire routes that need to be considered, but in terms of social distancing, the only area I would consider that appropriate is once you've got everybody outside and maybe at your assembly point, just reminding staff to try and encourage people to keep that distance within whatever family groups they've attended within. And first aid procedures, certainly there are going to be changes in the protocols and priorities you have, and therefore it's important that you set that within a high level procedure so that you can train those in and make sure everybody is compliant and understanding of what needs to be done. We've put the other bit in red. If any of you can think of any other procedures that you might like to talk about, please put them on the chat line, and during the questions we might be able to pick up on some of those issues. And the final point on here, as with work instructions, use the procedures to train your staff, and this can be done during furlough. Please don't just exclude staff. The more you can involve them, the better it's going to be once they come back to feel that you've taken their views seriously, that they're understanding of where the risks are and where you put the control measures in place and how you're going to manage it. Next slide, please. Okay, so making sure that both your instructions and procedures are effective. As I've talked about all along, it's vital that you involve staff and asking for feedback. It's also important that you monitor and supervise what actually happens, conduct inspections and audits, verify effectiveness. If you go back to the clinic we had on cleaning, there was a suggestion you can get a product that you can see whether bacteria has been moved from surfaces. That won't check for viruses, but it will establish whether you've cleaned that surface thoroughly in the first place. So it could well be an effective way of monitoring the standards of cleaning that you've got in place. Make sure you review and revise all the way along and following risk assessments. So if you find something's not working or you need to adapt something, make sure you go back and review it. Test procedures, desktop where necessary, example dealing with pool incidents, and make sure they're reviewed frequently, particularly during this first few initial steps of reopening, and then as guidance changes, hopefully we get on top of this, and hopefully in the long run, to help with all our sustainability, we can all begin to take some slightly less structured approach to dealing with this. But in the meantime, it needs to be an ongoing process. Just a reminder, employees have a duty under the Health and Safety at Work Act to provide information, instruction, training and supervision. This can continue during furlough. I think the only issue is where you've got people that maybe if you're using them for longer than they would have got through minimum wage with their 80%, you might just have to top up the differences. But you are allowed to try and help keep people's CPD up to date, and certainly any new procedures you're bringing in, it would be a good practice to get them involved now or as soon as you've developed them. And I think that is my last slide, so I think it's back to Caroline.
Hopefully you all found that useful, and I think again reiterating what Ian has said is don't reinvent the wheel. It's simple. It's just look at simplicity, look at how you can make things very, very clear to the customers and staff in a very simple way. You do not need overkill at all. Both Ian and I were out on a site yesterday and just talking it through with the site managers about where they can put classes and where they're going to put kit and what they're going to do outside and etc. It is just common sense. It's a common sense approach, not overcomplicating what we do. So just so you guys know, if you do need any help, as we've said already, please give us a ring, and we will definitely be there to help you.